Okay, so the first major function we're going to tackle here with micronutrients is going to be their association with metabolism. And then towards the end of this slide deck, we'll talk about the role they play in the health of our blood. So our B complex vitamins specifically play major roles in our metabolic pathways. Things like riboflavin as FAD, niacin as NAD, right? Those electron carriers that end up carrying the energy that was harnessed from breaking apart these molecules in order to power the electron transport chain, which is ultimately going to power ATP synthase, right, to make a majority of our ATP. And so we're going to talk about all of these and where they show up and what role they play. And so this is a really great reference slide. We're going to be pulling up the diagram of the citric acid cycle, aka the Krebs cycle, a lot, really looking at multiple pieces of our metabolic pathways, but you're going to see a lot of the coenzyme names showing up in those pathways. And so this shows which vitamin is associated with those coenzymes. So like I said, riboflavin acting as FAD, which will turn into FADH2 and then donate 2 electrons and 2 protons into our electron transport chain process. Niacin acting as NAD, okay? And you can see which different metabolic pathways they play a role in, as well as the transformation of amino acids into sugars and lipids into sugars, et cetera, back and forth. Okay? But ultimately, the goal of the use of these is in order to allow us to harness energy from these various molecules. So we're going to see the role they play in conversion to pyruvate or acetyl coenzyme A, in the energy harnessing as a process of oxidative phosphorylation, right, that electron transport chain, as well as the role they play in our citric acid cycle, again, also known as the Krebs cycle. Those two terms are interchangeable. So the majority of what is going to power the electron transport chain and allow us to make ATP is going to come from the electron carriers that are taking electrons during all these steps. And a majority of our electron carriers are created during the Krebs cycle when we're turning or breaking down acetyl-CoA through those various chemical reactions until eventually all the carbons are going to be released as carbon dioxide. Every step of the way, we're harnessing energy in some form by taking the electrons and free protons that are created through this process and then carrying them to the inner membrane of the mitochondria to power electron transport, or the electron transport chain, which is what we see here. Right? This whole diagram is showing the inner portion of a mitochondria, so we're just seeing the inner membrane. Out here is the intermembrane space. So these electron carriers are going to donate an electron to the electron transport chain, as well as release the proton that they were carrying with it. And that proton will be pushed into the intermembrane space as the electrons move, ultimately then flowing back through ATP synthase and powering the production of ATP. So we see niacin acting as NAD, riboflavin acting as FAD, so on. So first off, thiamine, aka vitamin B1. This is a coenzyme. It's required for our carbohydrate metabolism. So this is needed in order for us to transform pyruvate, that 3-carbon sugar that was made from breaking apart glucose, turning that into acetyl-CoA, which is 2 carbons with this coenzyme attached. It also plays a role in some of the fatty acid metabolism and is a major component of our nerve cell membranes. So it plays a big role in our ability to transduct information through our thoughts, right, and motor control. So really any whole food is going to act as a source for thiamine. Lots of root veggies, fruits, pork is the main meat that you'll find thiamine in, and many of our whole grains. If you're not getting enough thiamine, this can result in muscle wasting and nerve damage. As I said, it's a big component of those nerve cell membranes. And our nervous system is mainly communicating as far as what signals we're putting out with our muscles. And so anything that is going to affect our nerve cells is going to affect our muscles and nerves themselves. So thiamine here showing up as the coenzyme TPP, so like I said, is involved in that transformation of pyruvate into acetyl coenzyme A. It's going to play a role in our TCA cycle, and those various chemical reactions that are occurring to break down acetyl-CoA the rest of the way. So next is riboflavin, which, as I've pointed out a couple times now, is going to act as that electron carrier FAD. So it's a coenzyme specifically used in electron shuttling for that ATP production pathway. It also plays a role as an antioxidant, which we're going to talk a bit more about in the next slide deck, because it is a part of the glutathione peroxidase pathway, which is going to be removing H2O2 from the body, which is a result of managing those free radicals. And so you can get your riboflavin from milk, yogurt, and organ meat like liver, eating other animals' liver. In fact, liver is going to be show up a lot as a great source of vitamins. If you think about what we've learned so far about liver's function in storing and transforming all of our different nutrients that we are absorbing through our digestion, it makes sense that another animal's liver is going to have a lot of those things as well. Okay? And so riboflavin deficiency, often associated with sore throats, swollen mucous membranes, not a big deal for you to know that one. And so anywhere you see FAD, that is riboflavin. So all of our electron carrier production pathways plays a role in the transformation of acetyl coenzyme A back to fat, as well as breaking down fat into acetyl CoA to be used in the TCA cycle. Shows up a couple times in the TCA cycle, and then will donate its electrons to the electron transport chain. And so this is what that uncharged FAD looks like, right? Before it is carrying electrons. So it comes into our process as pyruvate is being transformed, or during the citric acid cycle, with these nitrogens that are very electronegative and thus are available to take electrons. And so as the other molecules are being broken apart, it will accept those electrons as well as the free protons that came from breaking that molecule apart, the proton, basically the hydrogen nucleus, and will carry both of those to the inner membrane of the mitochondria for electron transport. So we see two new hydrogens showing up, and those are those nuclei and the free electrons. And so here it is, basically accepting both of those things as we break these carbons off one by one throughout the TCA cycle. And then we'll donate those electrons to our electron transport chain. That's basically all that's being shown here. Right? And so niacin is our other example, playing a big role in that electron transport. So this is going to be NAD and NADP with a phosphate attached. And these are our other electron shuttlers. So we can find, and niacin is one of your higher DRIs as far as vitamins go. So you'll see that in milligrams instead of micrograms. But niacin comes from all meats. It's in a lot of our processed foods also. You'll see that as one of the vitamins that it shows at the bottom very, very frequently. And it's starting to be added into our enriched bread products. So a lot of our enriched foods are being enriched with niacin. Don't remember why I put this point here. Toxicity can result from supplements for all of these. But I guess since it is so common, it is one of these that you might need to be aware of and be careful about, especially if you are using supplements that have niacin. So if you exercise frequently, a lot of pre-workout has a large amount of niacin in it. So that's something to look out for, as well as a lot of your B vitamins. So be very careful with your pre-workout consumption. A lot of our other exercise supplements are going to be really high in your vitamins. I think I have a pre-workout here that has like 20,000 times, 20,000% of your daily DRI for a lot of the B vitamins, and has made me really wary about using it. And I really haven't. It was sent to me as a gift. But yeah, something to be aware of. All right. And so anywhere you see NAD, that is niacin. It's involved in almost all of these processes. So the conversion of glucose into pyruvate, the conversion of pyruvate into acetyl coenzyme A, and then the use of acetyl coenzyme A during the TCA cycle, as well as donating electrons to the electron transport chain. It's involved in our transformation of amino acids, as well as the transformation of lipids into acetyl coenzyme A and back. All right, so biotin is a coenzyme involved in a few different processes. So gluconeogenesis, which was the production of new glucose from fats and proteins, right? The production of fats themselves, the production of ATP, and there's some research to suggest that it plays a role in the expression of our genes as well. So using our DNA information to produce proteins, determining which genes are going to be expressed and in what form. Okay? Biotin content has been determined from very few foods. And deficiencies typically show up as these physical symptoms: hair thinning, loss of hair color, red rash or face. And so biotin we see in a few less processes here, mainly having to do with our metabolism of fat. But biotin is what is going to be a major component of the coenzyme that makes acetyl-CoA. So acetyl coenzyme A, that coenzyme A, biotin plays a big role in, right? And so obviously is going to play a big role in powering or allowing our cells to do the citric acid cycle, right? Which is going to result in a lot more electron carriers. It's going to result in the majority of the ATP that our cells make through aerobic respiration. Right? B6 is a group of 6 very closely related compounds. This is part of a coenzyme for over 100 different enzymes, mainly in our amino acid metabolism, okay? Including transamination, so the changing or creation of new amino acids by moving amine groups, and plays a role in our homocysteine metabolism, which we're going to talk about again here very soon, as well as our production of hemoglobin, which is the protein that is going to carry oxygen within our red blood cells. So very important for that. So we can see B6 showing up as the coenzyme PLP here in various different processes. Lots of great sources for B6 in basically all of our meats and a lot of our starchy vegetables, and is being added in enriched cereals. So B6 is relatively common. Folate is one of these that is going to be very strongly, or has been very strongly related in research around health during pregnancy, because it plays a big role in DNA synthesis. And so during pregnancy, while an entire new organism is developing and creating new cells at a very high rate, something that plays a role in the ability to produce more DNA can be very critical. And so folate is there, as well as in the metabolism of those proteins. And so it's very critical for cell division early on during pregnancy. So it has been associated with spina bifida, which is where the spinal cord is protruding out of the vertebrae, right? The vertebrae didn't form fully in order to fully wrap around the spinal cord, and thus it is protruding out and is easily like pinched and messed with, right? Really hard for that part of your nervous system to work correctly, and that is a big part of your central nervous system. So really important to get the higher amounts of folate that are needed during pregnancy to assist with that DNA synthesis, assist with your cell production for that child. Right. So here we see some sources of folate, leafy greens like spinach. And then when we are digesting it, it's going to be given this methyl group, which essentially deactivates it. So folate is this ring structure with glutamate in our intestines. After it has been digested and absorbed, we're going to add a methyl group to it, which creates inactive folate. And so in order for folate to be activated, it needs a different B vitamin, B12, in order to become active. Right? So while that methyl group is attached, it is inactive. B12 basically takes that methyl group off of it, activating folate and activating B12 in that process. So folate comes from green fruits like avocado, a lot of our leafy greens, spinach, we have asparagus and broccoli here, and is really common in our grains, our cereals and bread products, and is often included in these enriched versions of the products, right? It's being added into these processed grains. So looking more at B12, has a variety of functions, shows up in multiple different parts of our bodies. So main role that we're going to be looking at is as a coenzyme in blood cell formation. So the ability to produce red blood cells properly in order for them to function. B12 is going to play a role. Required for nerve functioning. This is what is maintaining the myelin sheath of our nerve fibers. If you haven't taken a neuroscience course or learned about signal transduction pathways within our neurons, within our brain and spinal cord and all of our other peripheral nerves, those myelin sheaths are what allow for that process to be efficient and happen quickly. So maintaining the myelin sheaths of our nerve fibers is really important for our ability to transduct signals. It's required for the breakdown of this amino acid homocysteine, which we actually saw reference to earlier. Right? Here we go, with B6 playing a role in homocysteine metabolism. Homocysteine, if it reaches relatively high levels, has been associated with vascular disease. This plays a big role in our blood health. Having enough B12 to properly break down higher levels of homocysteine will allow us to prevent some vascular disease. And this only comes from bacteria that are in or on our animal-based foods. So whenever you're eating meats, you're ingesting a large amount of bacteria. And that may sound crazy at first, but your body is covered and filled with bacteria. If on average, an adult human body is composed of around 1 trillion human cells, so with your DNA, there are 10 times that number of bacterial cells on and in your body. And we've co-evolved to live that way. These bacteria are helpful. Most of them are helpful. Right? And so including those that you're getting in your food, to evolve to be able to digest that, right? And so those bacteria can produce B12 as a byproduct. And a lot of other vitamins are going to come from bacteria from our food and in our large intestine. And so deficiencies, since we have such various relation to different processes, deficiencies in B12 can result in vascular disease or blood diseases like anemia, result in low energy and fatigue, shortness of breath, and then pernicious anemia. I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at anemia here. I do have some slides describing it that you're welcome to look at for your own information. I'm going to focus mainly on the important parts that I want you to know about. So we see B12 showing up here in our amino acid pathways and our translation of some other compounds that play a role in the TCA cycle. This is showing homocysteine breakdown. We've got folate, B6, and B12 all playing a role in that metabolism. So we need all these vitamins in order to properly manage our homocysteine levels and not risk other vascular disease. So we can see when we have B12 deficiency, what is changing with our red blood cells. Okay, so this is looking at what is considered a normal red blood cell, relatively large, relatively circular. With B12 deficiency, we start to get different shaped blood cells that is going to affect their ability to carry oxygen and affect the clotting of these blood cells as they travel through your vascular system. And so you can see this kind of oblong shape rather than the circles that we had before. Okay. So another one of our B vitamins, pantothenic acid, is needed in order to construct that coenzyme A. So this is obviously going to be a component of the TCA cycle where we are going to end up breaking down the rest of those carbons once coenzyme A has been attached to the 2 carbons creating acetyl-CoA. It's also required to build new fatty acids in our body. And we get this again from lots of meats, starchy vegetables like potatoes, and our oat cereals, as well as tomato products. So everywhere that you see coenzyme A being used, pantothenic acid is going to be important in producing that coenzyme. All right, so now getting more into blood health. So our first mineral to show up here, iodine. Iodine is critical for the synthesis of thyroxine. Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Still looking at hormones, which do travel through the blood. The next few slides will be more about blood. Critical for the synthesis of thyroxine, which is the thyroid hormone. And this is what is going to regulate metabolism by traveling through the body and binding with basically all of your cells, right? So it's a hormone produced by the thyroid that helps regulate your metabolism. And so it is also going to play a role in your body temperature, basal metabolic rate, and development as a result of that. So good sources are going to come from any water-based foods, really, or water-based living organisms. Marine animals tend to concentrate iodine in high amounts. You can get a lot of iodine from saltwater fish, shrimp. We have iodized salts around a lot because of the importance of iodine in our thyroxine synthesis and is common in our dairy products. And so having too much or too little of this is going to play a role either way, because again, this is regulating metabolism, and metabolism is our production of energy and our production and breakdown of all molecules in our body. So anything that's going to affect that in such a wide range, such as what iodine does, is going to cause deficiencies when there's too little and too much. And so having too much iodine is going to end up actually blocking the synthesis of this thyroid hormone. As a result, the thyroid is going to react and try to produce more of that hormone, and that is what results in goiter, or those enlarged thyroid glands. Having too little results in hypothyroidism, meaning not producing enough, and can also result in goiter. All right, so now more into blood. Sorry for getting ahead of myself earlier. So our blood, so everything traveling through our vascular system, you might typically just think of your erythrocytes, your red blood cells, but there's a lot traveling through that blood, right? It's mainly made up of the plasma, which are all of the water and free proteins floating throughout, hormones. But our blood cells themselves are also carrying proteins as well as antibodies, a type of protein, and various other types of blood cells that are going to play a role in our immune system. And so this functions in a big way for providing the oxygen needed for aerobic respiration and carrying out our waste products like carbon dioxide, but it's also going to transport our nutrients to our various cells and any waste that is produced from other processes. So our erythrocytes are the red blood cells themselves, which are mainly going to be responsible for carrying oxygen. Right? They have hemoglobin, a protein that binds well with oxygen, and so they'll be carrying oxygen to our cells and carbon dioxide back to our lungs. Leukocytes are our immune system cells, as well as platelets, and there's many other cells that we're not mentioning here, or more specifics, getting into T and B cells, etc. But general categories here: leukocytes are our white blood cells, which have a role with the immune system. Platelets play a role in our blood clotting, and then the plasma is that fluid portion, like I said, water and free-floating proteins. Right. So vitamin K, our first fat-soluble vitamin that we're addressing here, plays a big role in that blood health. So it's fat-soluble, it's stored in the liver and other adipose tissue. It can be produced as a byproduct of bacteria in our large intestine or in the food we're eating, but you can also find it in some plants. And so this is getting into what I was talking about, where you can affect the bioavailability. Bioavailability meaning how well you will absorb that food as it's ingested. Right? So you can eat food that has like a high amount of vitamin K, but if there's not enough fat in that food, or not enough fat used in the cooking of that food, that vitamin K isn't going to have fat to carry it in order to be absorbed, and thus will simply move on to be excreted with the rest of your feces. Okay? So you can increase the bioavailability of vitamin K by cooking in fats, and any of your fat-soluble vitamins by cooking with healthy fats. So vitamin K is mainly going to be functioning as a coenzyme used in the modification of our blood coagulation proteins, used in the synthesis of various blood proteins. And then what we'll be looking at in 2 slide decks from now, its role in bone metabolism. So your bone has various cells, again, that are going to either build more bone cells to store calcium or break apart your bone cells to release calcium. Right? Your bones have a big role in calcium storage for this reason. And vitamin K is a big part of allowing osteoblasts to function in producing more bone, producing new bone, depositing calcium. Let's skip through some of this here. And now iron plays a big role in our oxygen carrying. So you have 2 major oxygen carrying proteins in your body. We have hemoglobin, which is carried in which is in our red blood cells. So heme is a prefix referring to blood. Myo is a prefix referring to muscles. And so myoglobin is a protein that can store oxygen in your muscles. Since a majority of our ATP production, our metabolism is occurring in our muscles, that's what's using most of our energy in our body. Having a protein there that can store oxygen in order to power aerobic respiration is really, really helpful in reducing fatigue, allowing that function. And iron is needed in order for these proteins to function by carrying oxygen. It's also involved as a coenzyme in the metabolism of all of our macronutrients, or carbs, fats, and proteins, and is also part of those cytochrome proteins that are what make up the electron transport chain. So you can see them here. This is hemoglobin, which is 4 heme proteins with iron in each of them. And this is myoglobin, which just has 1 iron in it. Right? You see it kind of there in the center. And this allows it to bind with oxygen and hold it strongly. So the DRI for iron is going to vary greatly on these factors that we talked about a lot throughout this class that affect your daily recommended intake. So age and sex are going to play a role, as well as pregnancy. Right? So anything where you're creating a new organism is going to require a lot of these things. So and females in general are recommended a higher amount. So for adult men, the recommended intake is 8 milligrams a day, whereas you can see a pregnant woman is more than 3 times that amount, right? 27 milligrams a day. We can get this from lots of sources again, lots of meats in our enriched grains. Have that a lot. You can skip most of this. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to talk much about anemia. You're welcome to look more into the slides if you're curious, or reach out to me to talk about it. But trying to focus on the main content here. So last thing I'll talk about here, some major issues associated with deficiencies of these, of vitamins like folate and the other B vitamins, and with the mineral iron related to the various types of anemia. Big role in neural tube defects, making up that myelin sheath, maintaining that myelin sheath, playing a role in their membranes as well. So can have a big impact on your ability to think and transduct signals throughout your body, either sense or create a motor response. And then a big role in that homocysteine breakdown, which is going to support your blood health. So that's where I'll stop here for this slide deck, and then I'll see you for the next one on antioxidants.